Deceleration and the ability to decelerate is often the biggest difference maker for most team sport athletes. And deceleration does two things. Number one, if you're on offense, if you decelerate better, it gives you more space and time from the defender to then do those sport-specific movements and skills, aka score. And if you're on defense, if you decelerate better, you can stick with the person you're guarding better and decrease the amount of space and time they have. So just like every other skill in sports performance, deceleration is a skill and consequently can be trained. But what I think most people miss the boat on is what happens after the athlete decelerates. First, let's take a step back and make sure that we're on the same page in what we mean when we say deceleration and consequently what the ability to decelerate well means. So deceleration is the athlete's ability to decrease their speed and momentum the most in the least amount of distance and time. It's important to keep those two variables in mind for these reasons. If it takes me, let's say, 3 seconds to go from max speed down to 20%, and it only takes my defender 2 seconds, well, they're gonna be able to stick with me better, and I'm not gonna be very effective during sports. And consequently, if I'm trying to make a cut 5 yards away, and I start chopping 5 yards away, I'm totally gonna give away that I'm about to make a move, and also will not be very effective. But what I think most people miss is what happens after the athlete decelerates. Deceleration is about decreasing your momentum low enough to a reasonable speed to then change direction and get your momentum going in a new direction. So with this new understanding of these variables and why it's important, we can say that deceleration is the athlete's ability to decrease their momentum the most in the least amount of distance and time to a reasonable amount of momentum and speed to then get their momentum going in a new direction. Now that we have a working definition of deceleration and understand the components that go into decelerating well, let's break down the actual skill of decelerating itself. There are two main phases. First, the preparatory phase when the most amount of speed and momentum is reduced. Think the first 2, 3, 4 chops or steps decreasing the speed. And consequently, these are the most impactful and forceful steps that the athlete's legs experience because they have to create huge amounts of eccentric force in the opposite direction to consequently reduce their speed. And once the speed is reduced to a reasonable enough amount, the athlete then enters the cutting phase, which is really just about repositioning, mainly the shin angle, the hips, and the torso to then change direction very effectively and also safely. Because the shin angle, think about it like a direction arrow of where the athlete's gonna go next, once the speed is reduced, the athlete then puts their hips, torso, and shin angle in the right position to then change direction fast, effectively, and safely. So how do we test and evaluate an athlete's ability to decelerate? So if we understand the two main variables that go into it, both distance and time, we just manipulate those variables in different ways to create tests and consequently track those results over time. Here are two examples and one experiment that I've been doing. The first example that we use a lot here at TC Boost is the 180-degree cut test. Very simple. 10 yards there and back as fast as you possibly can with the timing laser on the 5-yard line. So you're measured your time from the 5 and back of the entire 10 and back. So you have to go into the cut with a bunch of speed, reduce it very fast, reverse your momentum on 2 legs, a bilateral cut, and then get out of there quick. Next is the ADA test, or the Acceleration Deceleration Ability Test. So you can do distances of 10, 15, 20 yards. We'll just use 20 yards as an example. You have to hit 90% or higher of your best 20-yard time to make sure you're going into the cut fast. And you have to decrease your speed and momentum to 0 in the least amount of distance. And the experiment that I've been doing on the 1080 sprint is a single leg step back test, I'm calling it. This is just proprietary at this point. But I can track not only the speed, but also the force that the athlete goes into the cut or the step back with and consequently comes back out of it with. Finally, now how do we train deceleration? So as it's a skill, just like anything else, there's a logical progression of exercises from slow to fast, easy to hard, and change of direction to true agility. Now I have a different video about this on my channel, but change of direction are pre-planned movements where the athlete knows when they're cutting and consequently where they're going after. Versus on the flip side, true agility drills, the athlete doesn't know when or where they're cutting and where they're going after, but they have to take in information from the environment, usually visual, but sometimes auditory, that then dictates when and where they're cutting and where they're going. First, starting simple and slow, just a few steps at a time, I call this the step-stop series, which is great for just having athletes feel what it feels like to stop themselves and what those positions feel like as well. Starting just with a simple stop, basically landing in a sprint stance as fast as you can. And the next level would be just a step back, step stop going into it just to feel a little bit of rhythm with multiple steps, like this. Next, instead of just 2 steps into the deceleration, we would go 5 yards into it to hit those same positions we just did, just with a little bit more speed. That was just 5 yards, but then the next level would be 10 yards. Next, just as you can overload an athlete's squat in the weight room, you can overload the preparatory steps on turf. So whether it's a bungee like this, just bands with an athlete pulling the athlete, or a 1080 sprint giving mechanical assistance, anything that just gives the athlete more speed and momentum going into the deceleration, and consequently is going to challenge those preparatory steps, decreasing the momentum in just those few steps. Progressing to more challenging drills, not just decelerating and holding it, but now introducing this concept of momentum reversal. And it can be as simple as 1 step at a time, like a single leg step back. A little bit more specific with the shin angles, like a lateral quick to stick. And you can overload momentum by using some gravity. Start with an exercise familiar to the athlete, like a depth jump, a vertical jump. You can also get specific with the shin angles, like a box drop to a lateral bound. Next is cone cutting, and by definition, this would be chain of direction, not agility, because the athlete knows when and where they're cutting and where they're going after. And this can be as simple as a 90-degree unilateral cut. You can get into pivot cuts as well. You can change the angle of the cuts by putting a cone in the middle, for example. So this is a great, simple drill series to start introducing multiple movements with the deceleration and cutting, with limitless possibilities of cone configurations. You can make it more intense by spreading out the cone so the athlete has more speed going into the cut, or you can set up multiple configurations of the cones and have athletes race going through the pattern. Last, the fastest and most challenging drills that aren't sport itself are going to be true agility drills, or drills that challenge the athlete's ability to decelerate and change directions based on perceiving information from their environment, so that they don't know when or where they're changing direction and where they're going after. So first of the two is the partner mirror drill. So you can do run back pedal, shuffling only, or any movement goes, where the person on offense is trying to get as far away, create a lot of space and time from the defense, and consequently the defender or the mirror is trying to stay as close to next to the offense as possible. And last is straight up tag. There's so many variations, it's so much fun, and it's been incredible to see time and time again athletes hit these awesome shin angles and awesome reversals of their momentum because they have to, because they want to win, it's competitive, it's chaotic. So those two things bring deceleration full speed, have fun, and happy training.